George of the jungle, strong as he can be.
Okay, remember we talked about in a previous video what your homestead exemption is and how the amount is calculated. In today's video we're going to be talking about how to turn it into cash, and for a married couple that can mean up to $85,000. So that's what we're going to be talking about in thecreditjungle.com today. This is George Anderson, and thanks for joining. And I'm just going to show a scenario here that, believe it or not, this is going to sound like something really unusual and nobody's really in this situation, but I ran into two of them within the last 2 months. And in the state of Utah, there are probably at any given time, there's 3,000 plus people that are in a Chapter 13 bankruptcy. My opinion is that with the forbearances and a lot of the other stuff that's gone on, that number will probably see an increase starting towards the third and fourth quarter of this year. So this may not be real germane to your situation right now, but it is going to be down in the future, so I just wanted to be able to get this information out there as maybe part of your planning for protecting the equity in your home. So we're going to use a very typical example here. I'm using some very, very realistic numbers, but this is someone who bought a home in 2017, paid $300,000 for it, put down the minimum down. They owe $290,000 at the time that they buy the home. So over the course of the next 3 years, their home has had what would be a very, very typical and probably on the low side appreciation. That home is worth now $350,000, and the balance on their loan is down to about $275,000. So were they to sell that home right now, they would have about $75,000 in net proceeds. I'm not factoring in a variety of variables in this, so I'm being very conservative on these numbers, but this is a very plausible scenario that we would see playing out anywhere along the Wasatch Front right now. So when somebody's in a Chapter 13 bankruptcy, they typically have different categories of claims of creditors. And there's unsecured creditors, there's secured creditors, and then there's unsecured priority creditors. Well, the priority creditors that are unsecured would be like the IRS, would be the attorney's fees, and in a Chapter 13, if somebody is in a, say, like a $500 per month payment plan, the first money that gets paid out, the first creditor, if you will, that gets paid out is the attorney's fees. It's called an administrative claim, and that gets paid first. After that, then you start paying your secured claims. So if you were behind on your mortgage, if you had, say $5,000–6,000 worth of mortgage payments that were behind, okay, after the attorney's fees are paid, then you have $500 a month that is going to now go to the mortgage company to start catching up those arrears. And then if you have other secured claims, IRS lien, tax liens, whatever, then those get paid. But the last person who gets any take in a Chapter 13 bankruptcy is always going to be the unsecured creditors. Now, depending on the budget and how things were done at your 341 meeting or your budgeting meeting where you have with the creditors, the unsecured creditors are most of the time going to be getting something less than 100% of their claim. Everybody else gets 100%, the unsecured creditors get something less. It's possible for them to get zero, but it's interesting, and I'm going to bring up a payoff statement here from a transaction from last year, but this is somebody that was in a Chapter 13 bankruptcy. And if you're in a Chapter 13 bankruptcy and you request a payoff from the trustee payoff looks confusing because it's going to have two numbers on it. It's going to say, well, to pay this amount to the unsecured creditors would be this dollar amount. To pay 100% back to the unsecured creditors would be this amount. So that payoff could vary. If somebody had, let's just say they had $50,000 worth of unsecured debt in their Chapter 13 plan, and they're paying back 20% to the unsecured creditors. That means the unsecured creditors are going to only get $10,000, and they're not going to get that. They're not going to get the first dime of that until all the secured creditors have been paid. So you could be 2-3 years or maybe even longer into the Chapter 13 before the unsecured creditors get anything. So if you called up the trustee's office before you've been in your bankruptcy for 3 years, so we've got this 3-year mark here, okay, that's something that we want to look at. If you want to pay off your bankruptcy prior to the 3 years, the unsecured creditors are going to get 100%. okay, most of the time. After the 3 years are done, you can pay off the unsecured creditors, and there's a little bit of a variable in here, and there's some things here. This is why you have an attorney. This is why I'm not giving legal advice. But for the most part, once you're past that 3-year mark, you can pay off the unsecured creditors from the sale of your home, and you can force them to take the smaller percentage. The reason is because you have a certain amount of the equity of your home, which in Utah, if you remember, it was $85,400 for a joint couple for the year 2020, that amount is exempt from creditor claims. In other words, you can receive a certain amount of money from the sale of your home. It can be from like an injury lawsuit. There are certain things where the funds that come in are exempt from creditor claims, but the most common one is going to be the equity in your home. If you're using this money, in other words, if Uncle Bob, writes you a check and just says, "Oh, honey, let me just do you a favor, I'll pay off your bankruptcy," that's not an exempt source of funds. So your unsecured creditors, you would owe them $50,000 instead of $10,000. So the question is if what do you want to pay off your bankruptcy? Do you want to pay it off when you owe 50 grand, or do you want to pay it off when you owe $10,000? Okay? Obviously, if you can save $40,000, that's a no-brainer, but how do you do it? So this scenario right here, and I'm dealing with a couple that has almost these exact same numbers, a little bit different, but it still applies. Using this money here, because it's a married couple, 100% of these proceeds here are exempt from creditor claims, and once they're past their 3-year mark, which is only coming up in a couple of months. So when I sat down and I got this scenario, I said, look, let's consult with your attorney. Let's make sure that we've got the numbers right and everything else, a good lay of the landscape on here. But let's just wait a couple of months. Let's make sure that when we sell your home, we're after this 3-year mark, because if we can do that, your bankruptcy, the amount that you have to pay to your bankruptcy is going to be $40,000 less, which means that there's going to be $40,000 extra in their pocket that they can use for the down payment on the next home. So that's what we're going to do on this one. We're just going to take our time a little bit, not for much time, maybe for another 6-8 weeks before we get everything going. But the beauty of it is that payoff statement from the trustee, that right now, if we get it, says, well, you can either give us $50,000 or you can give us $10,000. Well, that $10,000, because it's coming from the sale of the home and those funds are exempt, we can pay off that Chapter 13 for $10,000, get a discharge. They get good terms going into their next loan. They're still going to have to do either an FHA or a VA loan going into the next one. This person's a veteran in this case, which I love doing loans for veterans. But there's going to be a $40,000 down payment there. And this is for, disabled veteran that has otherwise, pretty decent credit and everything else going for him. So this is actually the best type of transaction for him to be able to get into. Great interest rate, low closing costs, and saved him $40,000 of the proceeds from the sale of his home to come out of his bankruptcy and to do it clean and legally and to give him a real advantage. So I hope that makes sense. I'd love to be able to help you with your situation. Please push button, get mortgage professional, and I hope to talk to you soon. Thanks.